this topic, I'm really going to be painting this picture of what the entrepreneur of tomorrow is going to look like. And so my main goal with this conversation is to hopefully leave you thinking differently, but more importantly, put you in a position to transform that information into knowledge that you can then go apply to your own businesses, your own lives, and things of that nature. Thank you, Jamie, for the introduction. I am a founder, raised millions of dollars, for my last startup, so very, very familiar with that. I'm currently an investor, so I work at Sirac Ventures. We actually just closed our first $50 million fund, and so... Yeah, so I invest in pre-seed and seed stage startups. Specifically, our hypothesis is if AI is to deliver on its promise of increasing productivity, that's obviously going to lead to a lot of these companies, leveraging that technology to cut costs, cutting overhead, and forcing people to look for another option. And so we're really betting on this future where a lot more people are going to, be entrepreneurs. And so we're investing in technology that is going to enable people to be able to make a living as an entrepreneur. And also, I'm a scholar. And so currently, I'm over at Northwestern University during the day. So I run the business accelerator over there. So helping students and faculty commercialize research. And so, yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. Next slide. So I want to kick it off just, with some context, right? And I love, how, Coach Prime, he really set the stage, with the buffs last year saying, we're coming. And I think AI is doing the same. So this is just a graphic, from Goldman Sachs. They've been putting out a lot of reports around, different predictions. And they're predicting that 300 million jobs across the U.S. and also Europe are going to be lost or also degraded by artificial intelligence. And so I'll kind of get into, why that may be. Next slide. But the thing that I really want to paint is that the entrepreneur tomorrow is going to first think automation, right? And what this is going to look like is you'll definitely walk away understanding that in the future, English is going to be the tool that you need. And what I mean by that is, like, we all in this room speak English, and it's becoming the language at which you will speak with computers. The other thing too is math will be all that you need. And so if you're a parent, I would be encouraging you to really make sure that your kids are mastering English and math, because in an AI future where AI is in everything that we touch, from digital products, physical products, our cars, phones, you name it, these are going to be the two skills that they're going to need to be able to effectively use it. The second thing too is in a world of AI, data becomes your product. And I think the entrepreneurs of tomorrow are going to understand that. So that's not only proprietary data that you're obviously getting from, sales, your communities and things of that nature, but also the time is right now to start scraping data, right? And I'll kind of get into why that may be, but right now, a lot of content across the web and things of that nature, low-key has their guard down, but that may not be the case. And I think the example that I would use is Reddit. Reddit actually just locked in a $100 million deal with Google, so Google can train their large language models on that data. But that won't be the case in the future. So if there is data that you need for your business or your product, now is the time to go get it. And then the third thing too is brand. Brand is going to be the differentiator. And as entrepreneurs, you're going to have to master that. In a world where AI is everywhere, going to investors or going to your customers and saying like, oh, I have this AI product isn't going to matter, because every product has AI in it. So how are you going to differentiate yourself? And that's where brand is going to come into play. Next slide. So what you'll leave here today, hopefully, with is some new mental models to think to really think about this in a different way. The other thing too is I want to apply you with some tools and frameworks to 10x your execution when it comes to using AI in your lives today. And then the third thing as well is I'll leave you with a plan of attack so you can start to apply this. Next slide. So go ahead, take out your phones, scan this QR code. Throughout my conversation, you can actually drop questions, and then I'll answer those questions at the end. Cool. Next slide. So I want to start by, giving us a lens to look at the world, to really understand this before we get into the details. Next slide. And right now, the biggest thing to understand about AI is that we're in a pivotal point of history. So back in 1956, that's when we had the first conversation around what does AI and machine intelligence even start to look like. It was in the 1980s where literally in Chicago, where I'm currently based, they discovered the neural network and kind of what that looked like. And as you can start to see over here with all the different dates starting to pop up, that's where we are today. And so as you can see, AI started off very slowly, but now it's starting to pick up. And there's new research, there's new breakthroughs happening at a rapid speed right now. So next slide. And the reason why this is important is going back to what I said at the beginning. English is all you need. So today, if you want to talk to computers, you primarily need to know JavaScript or Python. Python is the language of AI and machine learning, and JavaScript has kind of been the language of, web development and things of that nature. But with things like ChatGPT, Gemini, some other products that I'll get into later, it's enabling the 1.3 billion people across the planet Earth that can speak English to now be able to do those things that engineers could only do. And so this is a really important thing. Next slide. And so from my perspective, here are the three things that I think are important when it comes to really positioning yourself for the future. So when it comes to point one, I like to almost think of this as like, being in the ocean and, seeing the sun on the horizon. The sun on the horizon is the research, and these are the potential outcomes, the futures that, some of us barely can imagine. And when I think about us as entrepreneurs, obviously this is the vision that you may have to kind of, get us to that future and put it in more hands. And then where engineering comes in is in a world where anybody will be able to code just by saying, hey, this is an app that I'm trying to build, or hey, here's a screenshot of a product page that I'm trying to create, and the AI creates the code. Now you put those three things together, you can now start to navigate that unknown a little bit better. The second thing too is I would say no one knows everything. So even with me sitting up here, I would be skeptical. I would be questioning everything. And the reason why is AI has traditionally been a black box, and it still is. The third thing that I would say is now is the time to jump off the porch. And the reason why now is the time to jump off the porch is going back to what I was saying about that rapid pace of acceleration and the breakthroughs that are happening. Be curious, because none of these people who are putting out these products know all the different ways that it can be used. And so you might end up discovering a use case that, the researchers or the builders of these products didn't even think about in the first place. Next slide. And so how should you think about AI? It's artificial intelligence. So the biggest thing to know is that these people who are building these products are literally trying to emulate the human brain. And very similar to the human brain, where you have, one area that deals with vision, another area that deals with audio, another area of your brain that deals with planning and reasoning and things of that nature. This is also true for AI as well. And so the three things we'll kind of be talking about is one, processing information. This is primarily what ChatGPT has been doing, and I'll kind of get into that. The next one we'll get into is instructions and coaching. So I'll articulate why I believe that we should be thinking of ChatGPT and a lot of these AIs as our interns. And so how do you coach them up? How do you give them the proper instructions to be able to get what you want out of them? And then the third thing that I'll talk about is leverage, right? And so one of the downsides of AI today is it's only been trained up on data up to 2021. And so it doesn't know what it doesn't know, and it's also not connected to the internet, and so therefore it's a loner. And because it's a loner, there's different products that are starting to emerge that's connecting it to search engines, connecting it to databases, where your information and your data may be, that allows you to increase the capabilities of the AI products that you may be building or may be using. So next slide. So kicking it off with processing information, this is all about the foundation models. Next slide. So the biggest thing to understand is I know AI became a buzzword over the last year, and we kind of bucket everything in this field under kind of like generative AI. But the thing I really want you to take away from this is when we say AI, essentially all people are saying is we're trying to mimic human behavior. So anything that you can do today as a human, drive your car, and AI will do it. Bank, and AI will do it. Plan a wedding, and AI will do that. Literally. And kind of what's enabling this is the deep learning. And essentially the way deep learning is, it's as simple as this. They build these models that literally are made up of neurons, and they're literally just taking all this data and just throwing it at it. And it's mathematically kind of figuring it out. And I'll show you why. Next slide. And so this is kind of, how, conceptually how a neural network works. But here on the left, you can see a picture of a real neuron that's currently in the human brain. And mathematically, this is kind of how they figured it out. And so if you go to the next slide, humans currently have 86 billion neurons. And you can kind of think of it in AI, we call these parameters, right? But if you see just some of these models, such as like BERT from Google, GPT-3 from OpenAI, they have 175 billion neurons. And so if the smartest human being on the planet only has 86 and this now has double, what do you think that does to intelligence? And also what training data is essentially that's the number of words that it has been trained on. So you can see here at the bottom that it's been trained on almost 1 trillion words, right? Which is wild. And then in terms of compute, it takes months for these to be trained. And so it takes about two to 3 months in order to train these models, which is a lot of power. But these are the 3 variables that you're going to continue to see people, a lot of these companies actually optimize on. To get us towards what they're saying is AGI. So next slide. And so what are these large language models doing? Essentially what it's doing is it's predicting the next word. I know a lot of us have been impressed by like the output and things of that nature from ChatGPT, but because it's been trained on 1 trillion words, it understands the different relationships and can calculate probabilities of like, okay, if I say new, there's probably an 80% chance that York comes after that, right? That's literally all it's doing. And essentially the thing that I want you to keep in mind when you are engaging with LLMs or ChatGPT and things of that nature is essentially you're asking it, what does a response to this prompt look like? And so when you ask it to do math or you ask it to calculate, what is the net income for my business, or can you predict, sales for the next quarter for my business? It cannot do that because that's not what it has been trained to do. And so that's why you have to be cautious and skeptical around the results that you're getting back from this. But more importantly, understand how these things work because these things do lie. And so next slide. And so with all that being said, essentially, we do have these highly capable machines. As I mentioned before, they have the capability of following instructions. And so what this looks like is the simple prompts that you're able to enter in a ChatGPT. I'm going to show you how to 10x that. The second thing, too, is we're now moving to a world of multimodal. And what this means is ChatGPT can not only give you text, but I'm sure you saw, probably last week across social, things of that nature, they rolled out a model that now can create full-fledged videos, right? So start thinking about like, what does that do once that model's in the hands of like a Netflix, and Netflix has all this content and now they can train AI, and now you can just go to Netflix and type in any movie that you want and bam, it's right there. What does that do to writers? What does that do to producers? What does that do to cast, right? There's all these trickle-down effects that can start to happen because these AI models are unlocking these new capabilities. The second thing, too, the third thing to understand is that these models can continuously improve. And the way they're continuously improving is a technique called reinforcement learning. And reinforcement learning is essentially this. There's a goal, and the goal can be like, hey, I want this to be better at, writing in a tone that is helpful, right? And so what they do is they take all the prompts that you enter in the ChatGPT and all the answers that you get. There's a reason why there's a thumbs up and a thumbs down. Any of the answers that you thumbs down, they throw away, and all the answers that are a plus, they keep, and they retrain the model on that. And that's because like you basically said like, hey, this is what a good answer looks like. And so now I can start to train it more on what those good answers look like. But this is a technique, if any of you were building an AI product, you could easily take advantage of as well. So next slide. And so given we have this highly capable machine, what does that do for humans? I purely believe that, when you enter a prompt and it now gives you the answer, the role of the human shifts. And I still believe humans are going to be in a loop, but what we're going to be acting more as are managers. And so it's going to be really important to really practice your judgment. And essentially what this looks like is just deciding like, hey, given what ChatGPT has given me, is this good enough? Does this work for, the use case that I have? Is there something that can be changed? Things of that nature, that back and forth nature. So next slide. And so instructions and coaching. This will actually get into, what makes a good manager and what makes a bad manager. Next slide. So when it comes to being a bad manager, this is probably how most of us in the room have engaged with ChatGPT. We just go over there, we write our prompt like, hey, write me a copy for this weekly newsletter. Like, hey, I have this grant out I'm working on. Can you provide some feedback? And the thing about that is you're not being as clear as you can be when it comes to the expected outcome, right? So imagine just giving that prompt to an intern that is day one on the job. If they've never worked with a grant before, how do they know what a good grant looks like? How do they know, what are the different things when it comes to the language to tweak? And so next slide. I believe that a good manager actually engages with AI in this way, right? Where I'm extremely clear on what I want the system to do, right? Given this system has basically, all this knowledge about the world, you can tell it what role to play. The second thing too is being extremely clear about the instruction. That's also important. And then the last piece at the bottom as well is this is a way for you to be able to say like, hey, when you give me my answer, don't give me something random. Give me something extremely specific. And this is extremely important just because when it comes to traditional computing, the biggest distinction between traditional computing and AI is programmers would program things to be deterministic. And all that means is if you give me your phone number, right, all I'm doing is saving that to a database. I can predict that. Like I know exactly what's coming in. I know exactly what's coming out. But with an AI, I can put the same prompt in there and always get a different answer. So it's non-deterministic because it's based on probabilities. And that's the thing people need to understand. Next slide. And so how do you become a good manager? Essentially, this is a framework that I've used. It's called PrEP, but essentially it starts with the prompt. You want to be explicit and you want to outline the capabilities. And so if you're doing something in relation to marketing copy and things of that nature, you want to use wording like you are a world-renowned marketer that works at Nike or works at any of these other companies that you think are really good at marketing and tell it to basically role play. The second thing that you want to say, basically this goes back into the role, but once again, just realize that sets the behavior. The third thing is instruction. So when it comes to what you're telling it to do, it should be 1 to 2 sentences max, like nothing more, nothing less. Be extremely direct and simple in your communication. And then when it comes to constraints, so parameters, I'll show you some of these tricks. Hello? Cool. Yeah. And so I'll show you some of these things as well. So next slide. And so give a role to play. Essentially, this is where this comes from, like this insight that I had. Because I'm a coder, I understand how to use their API. And they're basically using their API for ChatGPT as well. And so it's literally, you can go read up on it, but what they tell you to do is explicitly state the role that you want the AI to play and what the behaviors you want it to have. So next slide. Yeah, and then when it comes to clear instructions, I actually thought this quote from Ruben Harris, and some of you may be familiar with him, but knowing the right questions to ask is going to be extremely important when it comes to ChatGPT. Coming back to what I was saying about like mastering English, but the question you want to always ask yourself after you enter your prompt is, would this instruction make sense to an intern? And if it doesn't, you probably need to edit it a bit and make it a little bit more clear. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, so here, this is basically getting back to what I was saying around being able to tailor the response and the AI to do exactly what you want it to do. So here, I'm essentially on this example. Basically, I had all this information, and I wanted the AI to create a user persona for me. And so I told it like, hey, I want this format of like, here's the user persona. Give me a short paragraph. Tell me the needs of that person. Tell me the insights, and then write a 2 to 3 sentence problem statement. And then here's the criteria for a good point of view. I gave it some bullet points, right? And so now when it's making this decision and thinking about like, okay, what does a response to this prompt look like? It's taking all this into consideration. And essentially, what the brackets, what the double number sign does is it splits your prompt into different sections, very similar to like, getting instructions on a test and being like, hey, section A, section B, section C, and you going one section at a time. So this is just a good way to like have a really good clean prompt. The other thing too is when it comes to the enclosed brackets, anything that you enclose inside those brackets, it doesn't get mistaken as being a part of what you previously wrote. And so say, for example, if you were just writing sentences and you were trying to give it a desired format or whatever, because it's basically calculating the relationships between the words, there's a chance that it may mistake it as being a part of the other sentence. By using these brackets, you're saying, no, it's specifically only related to user persona. It's specifically only related to needs and things of that nature. So this is definitely a cheat code. Next slide. And then this one is a cheat code as well. So I call this "Let me show you." So very similar, to having a young kid, and maybe you're teaching them, their ABCs or 1, 2, 3s. You probably will walk them through a few examples. AI is very similar, and so literally at the bottom of your prompt, if you have examples of like, let's say for example, you wanted to write a newsletter for you, right? And let's say you have your past newsletters, you can give it three to 5 examples of your old newsletters, so it now understands your tone, your writing style, all that other stuff. That way it can start to personalize the output for you. Next slide. And then the last thing too is you can tell it to show its work. So this was research that actually ended up coming out of Stanford. But this little thing right here, telling the AI, think step by step. So say, for example, you have it working on a business plan, or you have it tackling a business challenge, right? Very similar to, being in class when you used to do math and your teacher would say, show your work. Just by putting in those simple words, the AI will then start to show you like its train of thought. And so now if there was a mistake in the train of thought, very similar to, if you showed your work for a math problem, the teacher could be like, hey, this is where, you made a mistake. Hey, this is where you could have done this. Very, very, very similar here. So these simple words, think step by step, is another way to enhance your prompting as well. Next slide. And then, so this was just an example that I applied to creating lesson plans. And so last year, while everybody was talking about, hey, AI is going to be used in the classroom and we're going after students, I went after teachers. One, because I knew teachers were being overworked. 2, a lot of their attention was going towards admin work, and only about 30% of their time was going towards material. And so I built a product and quickly got a lot of teachers to be able to use it. Quickly found out that they weren't going to pay, but what they told me was they got a lot of the materials from nonprofits. And so one teacher ended up connecting me with this nonprofit. They spend $50 million a year basically paying other teachers to create content that, teachers that are a part of this nonprofit can use in their classrooms. And I basically came to them and was like, hey, what if I can cut that cost down to you? So they had thousands of lesson plans, thousands of worksheets, thousands of quizzes that they already had given out over years. I took that material, ended up training an AI model just for them, using some of my prompting techniques. Now they use it. They have like 6,000 teachers. Now they use it to create all the lesson plans and stuff for their teachers. But this is where it's going. Next slide. So now I want to talk about leverage, right? So we talked about, this is kind of what the large language modeling is. It's just processing information. The second thing that we talked about is you're a manager in the world of AI. So what is a good manager? What's a bad manager look like? But this is how you start to unlock its superpowers. Next slide. So going back to what I was saying about data, the reason why this is important is because in our world today, 90% of data is unstructured. And so essentially the way you can think of that is that's social media posts, that's emails, that's all the docs that you've probably written for your company, things of that nature where it doesn't nicely fit into an Excel table, right? Which is more tabular data. So only about 10% of the world's data is actually in like an Excel kind of format, and could be used by traditional machine learning techniques and things of that nature. Next slide. But this is very interesting because this is actually about to get into the point I'm making around math is all you need, is because traditionally when it came to search has always been keyword based, meaning like if I wanted to search for, let's say for example, like I'm looking for movies for Black History Month, right? Unless those movies had Black History like in the title or in the description, it's traditional search would not show those results, right? And so in the world of AI, next slide. Math is all you need. And the reason why this is possible is because all that unstructured data, so those images, text, YouTube videos, podcasts, songs, things of that nature, basically it's called an embedding model. And what an embedding model does is it transforms that piece of data, so that image, that video, or whatever, to numbers that capture like the meaning and the context of that specific piece of data. And you can start to do some very interesting things with this. So next slide. One of the things that you can do is called vector databases, right? And the reason why this is important is because if you have an e-commerce product and you have a ton of products that you're selling, like this is one way to quickly be able to personalize the experience. Let's say you have a company and you have all these docs that you put into Google Drive or whatever your repository is. You could quickly put it into a vector database. So now when one of your employees is working on a project, it knows exactly what information they need across the company without them having to be able to search. And so the way it works is you take all that content, you put it through an embedding model, it spits out these numbers, and instead of putting it in a traditional database, it's now in this thing called a vector database. And the way this works is essentially on the application side of things, if you're saying like, hey, find me all the Black History movies, right? Essentially, you're going to do the same thing, run it in there, turn it into numbers, but now it's able to compare those numbers and do math to see like how close this is to, anything that you have in a database and return to you those exact results. And so this is extremely powerful because this also can be applied to things like search engines. So say, for example, if you're doing Q&A, once again, these large language models like ChatGPT lie. And so if you wanted to use something like a search engine, which I'll get into in a bit, like you would be able to take those results and then be able to plug that back into ChatGPT. So one, it can have real-time information, and two, it can have a source of truth. And I'm gonna show y'all one of the products that I use that I feel like makes me smarter every day. But next slide. So this is kind of what I was talking about, search engines. So next slide. And then the last thing too is APIs as tools. 2024 is the year of AI agents. And the way to think about an agent is essentially it's an AI that can think for itself. It can think for itself. It can make decisions for itself. And so if you think about when you're completing a task, there's a series of decisions that you may need to make. So let's say, for example, I'm creating a pitch deck for, a startup investor, right? I need to go get information on like my company. I probably need to go Google, find some stats that I can use, things of that nature. And so that's one decision. And then I need to take all that information and then put it into a beautiful deck. That's another decision. And so ChatGPT today can only do one thing at a time, where an agent is going to be able to take your task and complete it for you. So if you said, hey, plan out my wedding, book the venue, send out all the flyers to everybody, book the travel, things of that nature, call all the vendors, you would be able to literally give it that one task and it would be able to do it. And the way it would be able to do it is given tools. And the tools essentially are APIs. And so you won't even need to know how to use these APIs. You'll be able to connect it to things like Uber Eats, or say, for example, you have a Shopify store, and it'll be able to just quickly go to that API, make a decision on what it needs to get or grab, and then be able to, complete that task for you. But this is literally where AI will be by the end of the year. So don't get too caught up on ChatGPT. So next slide. So what would I do if I was in your shoes? Next slide. The first thing that I would realize is when it comes to the digital world, it's very similar to the physical. And the metaphor that I would use is very similar to the assembly lines for making a car, where you take all these raw materials, you pass it through the factory, and it's basically being built into this final car that we get at the end. This is very similar to how our digital workflows work, right? And the reason why this is important is because going back to what I was saying about different tasks, different decisions, similar to think about like Ford or think about Tesla. The reason why Tesla has grown into this big company is because it's replaced humans in its factory with different robots that's able to complete those tasks. You need to be thinking a very similar way. You may not have a physical product, or you may not have be built in a car, but where within your workflow can you start to replace yourself or augment something that you do? And so I like this quote from Ray Dalio where he says we all have our goals, and basically the way we operate to achieve those goals, that's our machine. And to achieve that machine, we obviously have everything that we need to do, but we also have the people that have to do that. The people piece is about to be replaced by the AI agents. And so what does your machine start to look like when that's true? Next slide. And so I'm about to get into some tools, some cheat codes that I would definitely recommend y'all check out. If you're not using Perplexity, tap in right now. I don't use Google at all. And the reason why this is a top niche product is because it does exactly what I was just articulating earlier around vector databases, where essentially all I got to do is enter, my question or whatever. It goes out to the internet, grabs all those sites, so I don't have to go through one by one, and it basically scrapes those pages, and then is able to create an answer that is cited with sources. That's one of the biggest issues with ChatGPT today is when it gives you answers, how can we trust it? How can I go see where it pulled this information? Well, Perplexity has solved that problem. Next slide. The next product that I would say as well is I only use ChatGPT today for coding. So if I'm doing any type of strategy work, creating pitch decks, things of that nature, I'm using Gemini. And Gemini is Google's multimodal model that they recently rolled out. And when I tell you it's extremely helpful, just in terms of the follow-up questions it will ask to get you to think deeper and more strategic about the things that you're looking to tackle, it's definitely a cheat code that you got to add to your repertoire. Next slide. The next one I would say is Product Hunt. So if you're an entrepreneur in here and you're playing in a digital space, Product Hunt, you can go on there right now and just go to, they have an AI category, and you can see all the different AI products that are coming out every single day to not only, find tools that you may want to use in your business, but more importantly, get inspiration for, things that you may be able to add to your products as well. Next slide. For any engineers or developers out there, or if you're a student studying engineering and you want to get a job in this field, I'm telling you right now, you need to go learn LangChain. So today, when it comes to creating websites and things of that nature, we use React and React Native to create mobile apps and websites. Moving forward in the future, when it comes to AI, instead of people having to know Python and things of that nature, you'll need to know LangChain. LangChain makes it super easy to build these AI products and AI agents. Next slide. The next thing that you will want to know is Hugging Face. So Hugging Face is also a tool for developers, but for any of the developers that are familiar with GitHub, where all the code is, this is where all the data and all these AI models are. So if you ever want to see what is about to come or see what data they're training all these models on, you can go to Hugging Face, or say, for example, you want to build a product for your company and you're like, man, we don't have no data, or we're missing some data. Go to Hugging Face. It's all open source, and so it's free to use. Next slide. The next thing you want to check out is, like I said, 2024 is the year of agents. And so Super Agent makes it extremely easy to be able to build agents in a few lines of code. And so if I was y'all, the way I would do this is I would literally go to this site. I would click on their documentation. I would copy it. I would go to Gemini or ChatGPT. I would plug it in there. And then I would give it the role of hey, you are a world-renowned software engineer that has worked for Google, worked for Facebook, et cetera, and my instruction is to build me an agent based off this documentation. And guess what? 90% of the time it's going to get it right. So now all you got to do is copy and paste exactly what it just gave you, and then just go plug it in. It's going to tell you if you made an error, where you need to, where you need to make some changes. But guess what? You don't really need to be a software engineer now to be able to do that. You can also ask ChatGPT, like, to explain things to me as if I'm a fifth grader. I'm not a trained engineer. This is stuff that I've just taught myself, and so you can too. Next slide. Going back to what I was saying about search, and how traditional search has been keyword based. This is a product here that's allowing you to be able to take advantage of, vector databases and that similarity between different items. And so this is a cool product that, some people may use. Say, for example, if you're in your company and let's say, actually, I'll give you a tangible example. So for the venture capital firm that I work with, we have these companies that we're tracking. And so right now, I either have to subscribe to these newsletters or manually go to TechCrunch and things of that nature to be able to always pull these recent articles on, the industry or the company. Here, I could easily just create a search query, have the search query, periodically update, and now I'm getting everything plus more that I probably was not aware of in relation to the industry and that company. And so that's one way we're using that at the venture capital firm that I'm at. Next slide. The other thing I would say is 11 Labs. So say, for example, you're somebody who's created a ton of newsletters or you've created a lot of blog posts, right? And you're like, man, how can I get into the podcast space? And maybe you have aspirations, but maybe you feel like, you don't necessarily have the equipment, or maybe you feel like, you may get nervous and may not know the right questions to ask. This is super cool because you literally can drop in a few sound clips of your voice. It literally will sound just like you. And then literally it's text to speech. So now if you had a blog post or if you had a newsletter and you literally just want to drop it in there as if that was you, recording that podcast for that specific blog post or whatever, you easily could. But obviously you can start to see where this can start to get crazy in terms of people using it to, mimic people and things of that nature. Cool. Next slide. And then for anybody that wants to build a mobile app, Android, iOS, Flutterflow is a cheat code as well. So it's literally drag and drop. They make it super easy to connect to a database. Literally, it's a one-click button. And you also can quickly drop AI into these products as well. So yeah, next slide. Yeah, so that's all the tools. I want to leave you with a few resources so you can start to go down this rabbit hole. Next slide. The first three are reads. And so these are some of the things that I'm consuming on a daily basis. One is Exponential View. It gives you a holistic view of kind of like what AI and just the future in general is looking like globally. The other one is Semi-Analysis. None of this is possible without GPUs. So if you've been paying attention to the stock market, you've seen NVIDIA been tearing it up, right? If you want to understand why, go read Semi-Analysis. The third one is Ahead of AI. So if you want to stay ahead of AI and not just get the latest, product updates and, releases as they roll out, this is cool because they always put them out like 2 to 4 weeks in the research papers before they introduce it to the public. And so if you want to be somebody who can quickly introduce a capability before everybody else knows, which can potentially give you a competitive advantage, so ahead of AI is a cheat code. Next slide. 2 podcasts. Next slide. Okay, so 2 podcasts I listen to, No Priors. So they get a lot of these big company folks who work on AI talking about it, and I just think it's extremely helpful to just see what's coming in the future. And they're talking crazy, so I'm not gonna lie, some of it's gonna blow your mind. And then if you want something that's a little bit more technical and kind of gets into all the different aspects of not only like large language models, but what about vision, what about video, what about audio, like all those different things, latent space, that's another cheat code podcast as well. And then next slide. The last one I would recommend is checking out this book. So Kai-Fu Lee is actually considered one of the fathers of AI, but he wrote this book, AI 2041, back in 2020. And when I tell you the future that he painted for 2041 is going to like have you like, what the fuck? Yeah, it's going to have you. Like, it's actually crazy that he said that was going to happen 21 years down the line, because low key is probably going to happen by the end of the decade. And so this has, consequences, like I said, not only on employment, it also has consequences for insurance, and how insurance then can start to impact health, and how that can start to impact a range of other things. But if you just want to really wrap your head around like what the possibilities are for the future, this is a really good book to check out. Next slide. And then, yeah, if you want to go deeper into this, here are some YouTubers, from MIT, and then just some other developers that you can check out. The content is very digestible. And the thing that I want to communicate is, I know traditionally a lot of people have stayed away from software engineering and coding because you've seen it as hard. So I went to school for data science and AI. And when I tell you, I'll never forget, I had a professor who basically broke it down to me similar to how you make a beat, where you may have, your hi-hat, you may have your bass, you may have your strings, you may have your pianos, and then all of a sudden you have this beautiful beat at the end. That's very similar to this AI thing. And you're telling me right now you can't, select different variables and figure out what you're trying to get at the end? Come on now. And so I personally, Jamie knows this, and we talk about this a lot. I personally feel like when it comes to AI and machine learning, that the white folks have been using language to keep us on the outside, and to make this seem a lot harder than it is. And it's not. It's not. All of us in this room are capable of being able to do this. So, next slide. So yeah, like Jamie said, if there's any questions, you want to dive deeper into this, you want to figure out how you can start to apply this to your business, I'm an open book. And so scan the QR code, it'll take you directly to my calendar. You can book a time, and we'll start figuring it out. And so yeah, hopefully that was helpful.
I'll just okay, I think it's working. So there was a QR code that he put at the beginning of the presentation that took us to like a little screen. So there's a couple questions in here that I'll read from, and then I'll also open it up as well for those of you guys who did not get a chance to scan the QR code and put your question in here to also answer the question or ask questions. Sound good? That work? Okay. So one of the first questions is, what are the top industries that will be affected by AI from a monetary perspective?
Yeah. Yeah, the top industries that I think will be replaced, I think it's actually going to end up replacing white collar workers first. And I think the incentive is higher for a lot of these corporations. So if you think about the tech industry, last year alone, there was like 300,000 layoffs. That number is still skyrocketing today. Like, all the big tech companies have already laid off people with plans to continue to do it more, right? And the reason why I think they have an incentive is because if you think of our economic environment over the last 4 years, when everyone got stimulus checks, when interest rates were decreased, that led to a lot of extra capital in our economy, and things need to be balanced out. And so companies are being forced to now start to optimize for profits. There's only so much that you can start to do to really increase revenue, and so a lot of them are starting to lean on cutting costs. And I think a lot of those functions that they're hitting, which is like marketing, sales, things of that nature, have already been demonstrated by ChatGPT and other AI products that they can do it, at a top level or above any human in those industries. Anyways, I think I do think how quickly that will happen. That will definitely take some time. But I think as AI agents start to come into play, and they can start to handle more complex tasks and really carry out those full decisions, that's where you'll start to see this start to rise up really rapidly. And I think the number that I recently saw was like 95% of like the Fortune 500s now are starting to use like AI in some capacity. That's only going to continue to grow. And so, yeah, I think it's definitely going to hit white collar work. So tech, I would say tech, consulting, banking. I definitely think this also another. I didn't even get into that bag, but the thing you also have to start to think about is robotics is also starting to catch up as well. And the thing you have to understand about robotics is for robots to do what they do, traditionally engineers had to code every single task. But now they have these large language models that essentially can act as the brain and essentially can take in a task, figure out what it needs to do, and now the robot can go execute. So what does it look like when you give AI a body? And that's coming by the end of this year. And so once robots start to hit, that's probably going to start to attack the bottom, like the blue collar work and things of that nature as well, where humans are still kind of in the loop. So.
That's a good question. And then someone asked the other bit, I think you just kind of hit on it, which are some of the jobs that will grow and emerge as a result. But another question here is, how can we keep AI from getting into the wrong hands and people with bad intentions?
You can't. I'm just going to keep it a stack with you. So I do this speaker series called Visions of Tomorrow. And I actually, last week, the speaker that we had, he led machine learning over at Lyft, and he was optimizing pricing and the route times. And one of the things that he talked about was when he was doing his research, he worked on a project that decreased the amount of time that kids would spend on buses. And as a result, that saved school districts a lot of money. And because they saved a lot of money, they can now use that money to keep, schools open. And this was specifically in Boston. And so they ended up saving around like $10 million. That led to like 2 schools being able to, remain open. But what ended up happening was you had all these wealthy parents who were upset now because like that ended up impacting the start time and things of that nature for their kids. And going back to what I was saying earlier about these AIs being able to continuously learn, and the way it works is reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning is optimizing a goal. And I think from a policy standpoint, it's still going to be very hard, especially in this political climate, for us to agree on what is that goal that all these AI should be optimizing for. So that's going to be something, one of the reasons why it's going to be hard to keep this AI out of bad people's hands. The other thing too is if you've been paying attention to anything around like OpenAI, Google, and Facebook, they're playing different games where you have OpenAI and Google right now keeping a lot of their secret sauce and how they built these AIs close to the chest. But then you have Meta, who's literally open sourcing this, and you can go to Hugging Face and you can read exactly how they built it, recreate it yourself, download it, train it yourself. It's really crazy. And by the end of the year, I don't know if y'all saw this, but they spent $20 billion on chips. They spent $20 billion on chips. And the reason why $20 billion is spending that much money is very important, because going back to what I was saying, the more computing power you have, the smarter these things can be. And so Meta is actually on pace to have a model that literally anybody's going to be able to download for free by the end of the year. And it's going to be probably better than ChatGPT. So what do you do there? And so all these different ways of distribution or controlling distribution of AI, I think it's very complex problems and decisions where our current policies and really our current society, we don't have the measures in place to really control that.
On time. So if somebody in the crowd has a question, I'll open it up to them.
Yes. I'm telling you, bro. Yes. Yeah, I think one of the things that the music industry did that a few other industries did not, such as like newspapers and publishers like that, is they got ahead of it legally. And so if you remember last year where all the Drake parodies were happening and Universal came out and shut it down. Yeah, the reason why that's important is because now Google, OpenAI, Meta, or whatever, they're negotiating these $100 million contracts to have access to that catalog. And so that's one thing, like without having that data, it's going to be very hard to train those models and really get the quality that, as an artist, you're probably going to, expect from an AI model if you're going to be using it. But it's going to come. The conversations are happening. I think the thing artists are going to be forced to figure out is what does it look like to still keep them in the loop? Like where within the creation process do they still want to play a role? If the AI is, rapping the words for them, like are they just focused on the writing aspect? Well, ChatGPT can do that, right? And they can train them all their past lyrics and things of that nature. So I think there's going to be a lot of questions around like where does the artist still remain in the loop for that? Yeah. Yeah. So I specifically don't know what they're doing, but if I had to take a guess based off the research that I've read, if you go look up the 4 different data sets that they trained ChatGPT on, those data sets were primarily 75% of it was like just Google like search history, right? And I think the thing that is extremely important here is we have to question how much of our context, how much of our history were in those data sets that they trained. And I think, as humans, we all have our biases. And so I do think it's very likely that when they were building that data set, that our information was left out. The other thing too is going back to what I was saying around like reinforcement learning. And so every time they're releasing a new version of ChatGPT, essentially what they're doing is they're fine tuning the responses to be safe, right? And so somewhere within the company's decision making, they decided that form of information that you were asking around Black people was something that would be deemed not safe, would be harmful, things of that nature. And so that's why like even getting us in these companies are very important, because ChatGPT, OpenAI has thousands of employees. They only have 2 Black folks.
He was nice enough to give me a mic. I know you got to go. Another thing that you can experiment with, which is interesting because Black information is suppressed, and that's based on what you can find available on the internet about Black people and who controls that. So if you try to create a story based on jokes from Bill Cosby, it won't give you anything because it says you're asking information about a sex predator. And if you try to get information or create a story based on lyrics from Off the Wall, because in certain areas on the internet, Michael Jackson is defined as a sex predator, it won't give you information from Michael Jackson. So what actually happens is, based on who's controlling our history, our information about our history in the future will be suppressed. So when we willy-nilly allow things to be said about people who have contributed to our history in some way, we have to be careful about that. Who knows what they say about Malcolm X? So you may not be able to get it to give you information from Malcolm X because he may be deemed as a terrorist in some sense. So I'm just throwing out an idea about or truths about how it actually works. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Hello. Cool. So yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to come see me. Like I said, I'm an open book. I can talk about this stuff all day. But this was fun. I appreciate all the questions, and thank you.